Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:06. It's O'Connor and Company here this last day of 2024, December 31st. Happy New Year, everyone. Coming up at 8:05, John Solomon from Just the News, and then at 8:35, Kurt Schlichter, my friend, fellow columnist over at Town Hall, author, retired colonel, soon-to-be retired lawyer. Kurt Schlichter joining us at 8:35. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Guinlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
I get the sense that you don't think I'm a pipe guy.
I
feel like, no, yeah, I'm feeling very judged by this, and I'm just excited
for the homemade yogurt, not for the pipe.
I have announced to the world that I'm going contrary to most people who try to give up vices for New Year's. I am actually taking up a new vice. I'm going to begin smoking a pipe. And I think, our next guest, James Rosen, is a man of class and style, and he's the senior White House correspondent at NewsMax, and I bet he appreciates a good pipe now and again. Do you partake of tobacco, of the finest weed of the Shire? There, James Rosen.
What a loaded question, no pun intended. Happy New Year to you both. How are you both? It's been a while.
Well, thank you. And well, it's been a busy time for those of us in the broadcast journalism business when it comes to politics here in Washington, D.C., but we thought we'd check in with you because so many of your colleagues are going through this annual navel-gazing process of talking about, the biggest stories of the year. And it struck me that a lot of them are saying, the most underreported story was the physical and mental and cognitive decline of Joe Biden. And it's very much in the passive voice, James. Like, wow, this story sure was missed. No, they were the ones who missed it, but you were sort of early on in suggesting that maybe there's some questions that need to be asked.
Indeed. When we say early on, the first and only, on January 19, 2022, so not even technically one full year into Mr. Biden's presidency, he held a news conference in the East Room. And it went for an hour, as they usually do, and he fumbled through the list of names of reporters that he'd been provided by his aides to call on. And at the end of that hour, though, so many of those of us who had been treated as potted plants started to raise a clamor, if you will, that in a move that spoke a lot about Joe Biden's generosity, but not about his political astuteness, he decided on the spot to extend that news conference till everyone in the room had gotten to ask at least one question. And it went on for another hour. It became the longest presidential news conference in history, and he made many mistakes in that subsequent hour, one of which was to call on me, I suppose, and I said, Mr. President, James Rosen of NewsMax, and if you look at the video, you can see just that information alone causes him to look off camera somewhere to glower at some aide as if to say, who the hell allowed this to happen? But I said, I have a delicate subject that I want to raise with you, Mr. President, with utmost respect for your life accomplishment and for the high office you hold. And I said a poll released that very morning in Politico Morning Consult had found that 46% of registered voters, this was January 2022, disagreed with the statement that Joe Biden is mentally fit. And he tried to cut me off, and I had to push through. And I said not even a majority of Democrats was willing strongly to affirm the statement, only 43%. I said, so why do you suppose it is, Mr. President, that such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? Thank you. Now, I always knew he wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time on that terrain, but his answer to many eyes validated the question. He simply looked at me and he said, I have no idea, and called on the next person.
Yeah.
And and I was blackballed for 8 months by the White House in the person of Jen Psaki and her successor, Karine Jean-Pierre. I was made to feel rude and fringy by my colleagues in the White House press corps. And now today, of course, we're reading all of the details that are starting to leak out about how well known his debility was inside his own staff for so long. It turns out this was not a rude or fringy question, but I would say a perfectly respectfully stated one, and one that centered on what we now know to be the defining issue of this president.
That's right.
James, I'm wondering if any of your colleagues, I always wonder what goes on behind the scenes. And, it sounds like your colleagues didn't really stand up for you, didn't stick up for you when you were blacklisted by Jen Psaki. But since then, have you had any apologies? Have you had any frank conversations? Okay, maybe apologies a little bit of a stretch, but have you had any frank conversations with your colleagues in the media, people from other outlets? Have they come forward to say, you were right, and because they're all now saying we should have asked those questions a long time ago. So what has the response post Wall Street Journal article about his cognitive decline been towards you, who again was the first reporter to really ask these questions?
Well, in lieu of apologies and earnest discussions, I've opened up, Julie, a GoFundMe page. I'm kidding. I have not done that. There is no.
Things are a little lean over there at Newsmax, apparently.
You know that you can't believe reporters, right? You just can't.
Oh, yes. We've learned
from your own experience, this very segment included. No, I haven't been the recipient of any sort of. There have been a few folks in the White House press corps with whom I was always friendly who have come up and said, "Hey, you were way ahead of the curve on that."
Yeah, good.
But, while I have you guys, and if we have the time, I did want to share a brief Jimmy Carter story.
That was my next question. Yes, please, because I wondered if you... Clearly, you're too young to have covered the Carter presidency.
Oh, bless you, Larry. This is true. This has the added benefit of being true. I was a kid during the Carter presidency, but I remember him quite vividly and, remember the hostages being taken and the sense of despair in the country. I met former President Carter in London in 2005. I was a reporter for Fox News at the time. I was covering Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. She was in London to meet with something called the Quartet. This was a group of high-level diplomats from the U.S., the UN, the EU, and believe it or not, Russia, 20 years ago, back when we thought we could cooperate with Russia on Middle East issues. And the Quartet was aimed at Middle East issues. And when the Quartet discovered that former President Jimmy Carter was in London on the same day as all of them, it was arranged that he would come and address the Quartet privately. The thought was that the architect of the Camp David Accords of 1979 could impart some wisdom to a successive generation of policymakers about how to make peace in their time. And instead, they got an earful from the former president about settlement activity and the perils of allowing the Israelis to get away with too much, which pretty much summed up Jimmy Carter's view of the Middle East for much of the last 45 years or so. I, at the time, was working on my book about Watergate. John Mitchell, called The Strong Man, John Mitchell and the Secrets of Watergate. John Mitchell was the Attorney General of the United States. He went to prison for his role in the Watergate cover-up. He was denied parole in the year 1978 when he was 65 years old. Mitchell had been a bond lawyer, a pipe-smoking bond lawyer on Wall Street before he ran Richard Nixon's campaign and became the Attorney General. He posed no threat to any community. And yet, so I was told I had done an interview for the book with Jimmy Carter's Attorney General, Griffin Bell, who was also from Georgia. And Griffin Bell told me that as President of the United States, Jimmy Carter ordered the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to keep a former Attorney General, John Mitchell, in prison as long as possible and to deny him parole. And he was denied parole. So here in London, I found myself, I had a straight shot at the former president. I went right up to him. And I introduced myself, and I told him what I was working on. And I knew that John Mitchell, as Attorney General, had visited Georgia when Carter was governor. And I had a news clipping from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that showed that he was given a very gracious reception by Governor Carter. So I just mentioned John Mitchell, and I said, "Do you remember John Mitchell?" He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "What did you think of John Mitchell?" And he flashed that famous Jimmy Carter smile, even in 2005, and he said, "I liked him." Which was not unusual because a lot of the people who were supposed to fear and loathe John Mitchell, from Leslie Stahl to the special prosecutors who put him in prison, they all told me that they really liked him. They confessed to liking John Mitchell. And then I mentioned what Griffin Bell had told me, that President Carter had ordered the U.S. Bureau of Prisons to prolong John Mitchell's agony as long as possible, even though he posed no threat to the community. And he just frowned and shook his head no, and so he denied that. And so it awaits. I got some documents out of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons using the Freedom of Information Act for that book, Strong Man. But they only detailed the mechanics of John Mitchell's incarceration, not the politics. And so, hopefully, in our audience today, listening right now, there's a future historian who wants to use the Freedom of Information Act on the Carter White House to find out if there are any documents that shed light on Griffin Bell's allegation and former President Carter's denial.
It's a great story. As always, we expect no less from James Rosen. James, always good to talk with you. Happy New Year to you and to your amazing family.
Oh, and to you guys, thanks so much for being good friends year in and year out.
It's 7:16. Well, sometimes you see a story and you have to do a double take and you want to make sure, you look at the source, Julie Guinlock. Is this Babylon Bee? Is this The Onion? Is this some news satire site that has just popped up? And no, this is the New York Post spelled properly, so it's no sort of phony New York Post story. Get this. The New York Post is reporting that Susie Wiles, the incoming White House Chief of Staff, and former campaign manager, has ordered all cabinet nominees to the incoming Trump cabinet to cease posting on social media.
Wow.
Until further notice. She also noted that none of the nominees speak for President Trump. Hold on.
This is definitely a Susie Wiles mom moment where she is like, children, behave and stop fighting, because there was some fighting on social media.
Well, not necessarily from cabinet nominees. And yeah, let's get to that, because I think you're right. I think that is the root of this. But it is kind of odd for the Trump Chief
Mr.
of Staff.
Mr.
Yes.
Confefes, Chief of Staff, is sitting here tisk-tisking. Right.
Obviously, there are different rules for POTUS than there are for members of the cabinet, but if we're going to start putting out directives about being more judicious and expressing oneself on social media, perhaps we could have a talk with the man in charge now and again.
It's good to be king. Okay? It's good to be king. You don't necessarily have to
being
follow
one of his
rules.
Nominees for cabinet saying, wait, are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me? Confefe is asking me to be more judicious? Okay.
But I think you're right. I think that this is a reaction to, I mentioned this earlier, when Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk got into this whole H-1B visa, foreign-born workers thing, and all of this stuff that erupted last week.
Yeah.
Now, neither of them are cabinet secretaries, but they are presidential appointees. And whenever you go out there and you say stuff like that, the immediate impression is, oh, well, they speak for the president, especially close advisors like Musk and Ramaswamy. Musk was seen at Mar-a-Lago at President Trump's side every day for a month.
Well, he's apparently renting some sort of a cottage on the Mar-a-Lago property right now. He is obviously very close to the president, which I enjoy. I think it's great. I think Trump should be. I mean, it's very Reagan-esque to surround yourself with very smart people. But I do think that when you had Vivek and Musk, who are in charge of government reform, and are also part of the administration whose motto is Make America Great Again, essentially suggesting America isn't so great, that's why we have to bring in foreign workers.
Right.
And yet
which runs contrary to the other motto, which is America First.
Right, America First. And then they're also in charge of government reform, and I don't know many people who would deny that a H-1B program needs some reforms. It just did not look good. This is an optics issue. I have no doubt that Vivek and Musk are willing to look at the H-1B program and do the necessary reforms, but it all just looked bad. Susie Wiles is obviously saying, okay, children, behave.
Yeah, well, listen, the fact that they added that none of the nominees speak for Trump, I think, is really the root of this. Because a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, they're doing that just because they want to get through confirmation and they don't want to tweet anything or say anything that is going to be held against them during the hearings. Now, that ship has sailed. What they've already said over the years has already been fully investigated and explored. It will come back to haunt them during these hearings, whether it's Tulsi Gabbard or Pete Hegseth or RFK Jr. or even Marco Rubio. No, this is about not getting in the way of POTUS and his agenda and what should begin 3 weeks from yesterday at noon, his immediate plan to get things back on track. And he doesn't want any unnecessary distractions. By the way, I believe that's also at the root of the other major announcement yesterday, which was Donald Trump's full-throated endorsement of Mike Johnson for Speaker of the House. Is it because he thinks Mike Johnson is going to be a great speaker, or is a great speaker? Probably not. It's because, as we will discuss coming up in the next segment, it's because he doesn't want an unnecessary fight and battle in the media that undermines what his focus is right now, and that is hitting the ground running on day one. We'll get into that entire discussion coming up in just a moment at 7:23.
Coming up, the The speakership battle is heating up. Rep. Massey says Johnson is the next Paul Ryan, but Trump has endorsed Johnson. Also, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser just met with President Trump to discuss shared priorities. I hope that includes putting criminals in jail. We'll discuss it all. Keep it here. It is 7:30.
It's 7:36. It's O'Connor and Company here on this very exciting New Year's Eve presentation. Are you ready? When do you start your festivities, Julie Guinlock, for your big New Year's Eve? Like right after the show?
When does the show end? Yeah.
Yeah. See,
yeah.
Exactly.
Popping that champagne. Yeah. Watching The View. Just kidding.
Oh. Now you're going to need something stronger than champagne if you're watching The View. Yeah, when should I smoke my first pipe?
Oh.
I might have to do a little mid-morning
I think that sounds great.
bowl of tobacco. We shall see. I'm very excited about that. Coming up later in this program at 8:05, John Solomon from Just the News. And then at 8:35, Kurt Schlichter will finish up the new year for us. But Julie, we've got some more political news to get to, and had to do a big development in the ongoing discussions over who the next Speaker of the House should be. Now, after the protracted and somewhat clumsy affair that involved refunding the government, the continuing resolution, the negotiated deal that was just a pile of stinking garbage that then got thrown out, and then a new deal, and then that got rejected, and then finally at the last minute, averting a government shutdown, we had our deal. And coming out of that, it appeared as though Speaker Johnson, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, might be in danger of facing a challenge for the gavel. There was a lot of discussion that it's like this was not a good showing for the Speaker, and that it did not portend stability and leadership going forward into the Trump administration. And I think it was noteworthy that President Trump remained pretty much quiet during the whole thing. Yeah. He didn't undermine Johnson, but he also didn't praise Johnson. I think that he just, listen, it is interesting that Trump is very different this time around, I think. And knowing what he learned in the 4 years that he was president, and I think even more instructive, what he has learned in the 4 years being out of the White House, he said, okay, listen, this is an issue of the House. Johnson might have some challenges to his leadership. No reason for me to jump into this. Let's just see what plays out. And then the most important thing happened over the course of the last 10 days. Nothing. Nothing happened. Nobody stepped up. Nobody said, that's it, I'm going to challenge Johnson. Nobody tried to rally support. Nobody actually officially said, this is it, Johnson can't be Speaker, and here's the alternative. And that's the key. No alternative. And after waiting and waiting and waiting, President Trump yesterday put out a statement that was a full-throated, unambiguous endorsement of Mike Johnson, saying he will do the right thing. He is a good man. We are going to move forward with this agenda. Let's make America great. Bing, bang, boom, it's over. Or is it? That should be it. As far as I'm concerned, if there was going to be a challenge to Mike Johnson, it should have emerged by now.
That's
but
right.
We do not have the luxury of having a protracted fight. There is business that needs to get done, not least of which to certify the election results so that we can move forward with the inauguration. They should have a day one vote. Johnson's the Speaker. Get the committees formed and begin on day two with the process of actually maybe crafting legislation and debating issues so that when Trump comes into office, he's not just faced with executive actions. He could actually sign some bills if the Senate can get moving. Let's actually show the American people that the Republicans are capable of leading and getting something done. And I think that really was the root of all of this. Trump does not want this nonsense getting in the way of what he clearly is ready to do. And so I know that there are Republicans who think that Johnson isn't the guy, but short of an alternative, it's over. And they should fight. Trump has spoken. He's the leader of the party. I think that they should fall in line.
Well, Representative Massey is one of these people who's raising some concerns. He says that that Johnson will be the next Paul Ryan, which for true conservative, fiscal conservatives, I mean, that is an insult.
That is an insult. And he also made note of the fact that Trump had endorsed Paul Ryan as well. He actually said, listen, Trump, you endorsed him and look what happened.
Yes, but Massey did not come forward to challenge Johnson formally. So, this seems to be a done deal. I will tell you also, Johnson got a lot of crap about the CR, the continuing resolution. I feel like it was a little bit unfair, because a lot of people were saying, this is not, we shouldn't be doing business as usual in this Trump era. I don't think Johnson would have proposed that CR without Trump's approval. And Trump was silent on it. But I do think Johnson has gotten kind of a crappy deal. I think that he's trying to keep, I think it's very difficult to be speaker. I think he's trying to keep things moving. And so I think some of the hatred and visceral that is directed at Johnson is unfair.
Also, it should be pointed out that Matt Gaetz, who knows a thing or two about the backroom drama that's involved with challenging a Speaker of the House and unending it, as he is the instigator of Kevin McCarthy losing the gavel that led to Mike Johnson becoming Speaker. He chimed in on this yesterday and said, Trump's right. This is art of the deal stuff, and we don't have the luxury that we had in 22 or 23 coming out of the midterms, where we could take our time and get concessions from McCarthy in exchange for him getting the votes and all that stuff. We have a deadline here. We got to certify the election. We got to move forward with inauguration, and we got to begin with the president's agenda. And so it's up to Republicans to, I think, as Matt Gaetz put it, help Mike Johnson be the best version of Mike Johnson he can be. And that's what a caucus does. I am so sick of Republicans saying, why can't we have a leader like Nancy Pelosi? Well, she was a leader like Nancy Pelosi because she had a caucus and a conference who, when the chips were down, fell in line and did what she said.
Yeah, I get it. But also, look what Nancy has done to her party. Okay? I mean, yeah, fine. You want a Nancy Pelosi, ruling with an iron fist? Well, look at what she's done. Also, Nancy Pelosi totally pandered to the extreme left of her party. I mean, and that is why we have a Democrat Party that's losing, and has lost the voice of the working men and women in America. So, I don't know. I don't understand that line.
Yeah.
I get getting people in line. Nancy Pelosi literally destroyed not only, the lives of many Americans, but her own party. Not a good model. We'll see
what happens. Listen, there's one thing when you're an executive, when you're a governor, when you're a mayor, when you're a president, and you can set your own agenda in many respects and do quite a bit with that executive power. When you're the member of a legislative body, yes, it's important to voice your opinion and let people know what you are displeased with, what you disagree with, and what you oppose. But short of actually having an alternative that you support and, most importantly, can get the votes to achieve, at some point you got to say, yeah, I don't like this, I'm against it, but we got to move forward. And that's where we are now. And by the way, not for nothing, Mike Johnson's a really good man. And He is absolutely a solid conservative. You may think that he's not the best conservative Speaker of the House and able to push through legislation, which I know is part of the job, but you've also seen him working with a Chuck Schumer-led Democrat Senate and a Joe Biden White House. Let's see what he can do now with the votes that he's got. It's 7:44.
Hey, it's Chris Plant. Find out what the media don't want you to know. Coming up this morning at 9, right here on WMAL.
Julie Guinlock, over the weekend we had posters that had been installed at bus stops around Washington, D.C. that had a sort of propaganda art image of Donald Trump in profile wearing a MAGA hat, and then it said, let's clean up Washington, D.C., let's take out all the MAGA garbage. And it had little logos on it that made it look like it was from the D.C. Department of Public Works. People were putting this up on the X, the Everything app, social media platform, saying, what's going on here? What is this? What is this? And when I saw it, I immediately thought, I don't know, I recognize the style of the art. There was a street artist in Philadelphia that showed Kamala Harris wearing an Eagles helmet, and it made it look like it was officially from the Philadelphia Eagles that the team had endorsed Kamala Harris, and that was a street artist illegally utilizing propaganda like that in these logos and illegally putting them up at bus stands. In fact, this person should be arrested for this. I understand it's free speech, it's free expression, but you're not allowed to break laws. This is vandalism. Right. The same thing held true here. These were unofficial. They were not part of the Washington, D.C. Department of Public Works. This was propaganda, street art meant to make it. Yeah.
I will say, though, Larry, just very quickly, the fact that I had no doubt when I saw this that it was. It might actually be official, as outrageous as it was. I thought, well, that kind of tracks.
Oh, I didn't know 100%. No. 100.
Right?
Oh, if you had told me that this is something that Muriel Bowser and the district council had authorized, I would not have been surprised. I would have been angry, but I wouldn't have been surprised.
Right.
Wouldn't have been surprised.
Well, I'm glad to hear it wasn't official.
It wasn't official. In fact, there is one official statement coming from the mayor's office, and I'll read it to you. Today, President Trump and I had a great meeting to discuss our shared priorities for the president's second term. President Trump and I both want Washington, D.C. to be the best, most beautiful city in the world, and we want the capital city to reflect the strength of our nation. I'm glad to hear that Muriel Bowser wants that to be true of Washington, D.C., because she hasn't led that way, really. You could argue that, in fact, her policies and priorities have been to undermine keeping Washington, D.C. the best, most beautiful city in the world. She goes on, we discussed areas for collaboration between local and federal government, especially around our federal workforce, underutilized federal buildings, parks and green spaces, and infrastructure. I'm optimistic that we will continue to find common ground with the president during his second term, and we look forward to supporting a successful inauguration on January 20th. Boy, oh boy, she is either an expert liar or we have definitely, can I say, turned the page on where we were 8 years ago, because, the attitude back then was he was illegitimate, and she was part of the resistance. Yes. And not so much this time around. In fact, 8 years ago, you remember the inauguration was an absolute bloody mess, with violence and riots and people looking at the other way as cars were being set on fire. And maybe she's gotten the message. Maybe she recognizes that he won in an overwhelming fashion, and maybe she actually knows that he's serious when he says that D.C. should be taken back under federal control to clean this mess up. Yeah.
No, this is great to see. And again, we've seen this change. Sean Spicer talked about this. He said he was down in Mar-a-Lago and that the sort of energy was different. People were really excited. And, look, you've got Zuckerberg going down there and all of these big CEOs that wouldn't have touched him with a 10-foot pole going down to kiss the ring down in Mar-a-Lago. It has changed. There has been a change. I think also, there is, to some degree, just some fatigue over all of these problems. I think even Muriel Bowser is probably at this point like, I'd like to see some solutions to the problem in this city. Yeah. Just cut it out with the Nazi stuff, cut it out with the, dictator stuff. Let's get some work done here. Let's improve the lives of people in DC.
That used to be how politicians worked. Yeah, yes, my guy didn't win. This one did.
Yep.
Now let's figure out what we've got in common and how we can actually work together. And,
that's right.
Well, we'll stay cautiously optimistic that that's really behind the statement from Muriel Bowser. It's 7:53.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.